All right, we're going to talk about the Arab slave trade or the Islamic slave trade because it was Muslims mainly doing it. And it needs to be talked about because this was going on before any European was buying before the Transatlantic slave trade. Like this was on for a long time before that. So we'll go from the past to present. So I'm going to jump around on this article, but forgotten slavery, the Arab Muslim slave trade. Let's see. Um, Scholars have christened it a veiled genocide, attributing the tagline to the most humiliating and near-death experience slaves were subjected to, from capture in slave markets to labor fields abroad and the harrowing journey in between. While official figures on the exact number of slaves captured from Africa in the trans-Sahara trade are contested, most scholars put estimate at about 9 million. The eastern slave trade in Africa was predominantly concentrated in the east and west African regions. In East Africa, the coastal region was the preferred route, and Tanzania archipelago of Zanzibar became a hub for this trade. Let's see. The Arabs raided sub-Saharan Africa for 13 centuries without interruption. Most of the millions of men they deported have disappeared as a result of inhumane treatment. This painful page in the history of black people has apparently not been completely turned. Read a loosely translated excerpt from The Veiled Genocide, a book by Trinidad and Dai, I think his name is, a Franco Senegalese author and anthropologist. Let's see. Enterprising Arab merchants and middlemen would gather in Zanzibar for raw materials including clothes, ivory, and would then buy black slaves who they would use to carry raw materials, also work in their plantations abroad. Slaves as far as Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia would be availed at the Zanzibar market and shipped through the Indian Ocean to the Americas? No. To the Persian Gulf or Arabic Peninsula, where they worked in Oman, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. African Muslims, however, never captured as due to the Islamic legal views. Which, yeah, but if you know about those areas that are named out in West Africa and northern, like a lot of those areas had some of the biggest Christian African nations. And then as you move the southern Bantu peoples, and as they moved down, if you know anything about African history, they actually conquered a lot of Africa, and that's why some of the peoples, I mean, they're still there, but they're minorities. Actually, like that's why a lot of the people look kind of the same because of the conquer. But the trans-Saharan roads to slave markets in Maghreb and the Nile Basin. The voyage that would take up 2 to 3 months involved inhumane conditions that saw slaves die along the way due to disease, hunger, and thirst. And estimated 50% of all slaves in this trade would die in transit. Like, that's a lot. That's a lot. And we always talk about the transatlantic slave, how a lot of slaves died on the way over there and stuff like this. But this practice is something that was already taking place before, America ever even had slaves. Before America even was a thing. While European merchants were interested in strong-billed young men as laborers in their farms, The Arab merchants were more focused on concubinage and capturing women and girls who were turned into sex slaves while living in the harems. So high was the demand that merchants would double the price of female slaves, with the ratio of captured women to men being 3 to 1. And then in big bold letters here it says the practice of castration on black male slaves in the most inhumane manner altered an entire generation, as these men could not reproduce. So, like, we talk about castration in America, but it actually wasn't a wide thing. It wasn't something that they did all the time. Like, otherwise, most of us wouldn't be here, obviously. So, I'm just saying, America was not the most heinous place for slavery. Actually, the Middle East and among the Muslims was the most heinous place for slavery. I mean, it's one of the places. I'm sure there's other places in Africa, right? Male slaves would work as field workers or guards at harems to ensure that they never reproduce in case they got intimate with their female slaves. The men and boys were castrated and made eunuchs in a brutal operation where majority would lose their lives in the process. So if 50% would lose it in the journey, how many more would lose it after they got castrated? Because Muslims, if you know any of the teachings of Muhammad and like dirty water, he said that water can't be made impure and all this stuff. Like, they aren't necessarily the cleanest when it came to, yeah. But then I'm talking about in the Middle East, and especially in that time, I mean, the world wasn't necessarily the highest on cleanliness, but like these places were no exception. See, the practice of castration on black male slaves in the most inhumane manner altered an entire generation, as these men could not reproduce. The Arab masters sired children with the black female slaves. This devastation by the men saw those who survived committing suicide. This development explains the modern black Arabs who are still trapped by history, said Liberty Mukomo, a lecturer at the University of Nairobi Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies. And even as Europe, one of the key players in the African slave trade, abolished the practice hundreds of years ago, the United States officially ended it in 1865. Arab countries continued to trade with majority ending in the 20th century. With the majority ending in late 20th century. In Malawi, slavery was officially criminalized in 2007, with intentions of some Arab countries currently being involved, albeit clandestine. Even as the rest of the world realizes the harm of slavery did to an entire continent and made a declaration to abolish it, the Arabs protested it, and it took a lot of international trade and revolt by the slaves for them to end it. But it is the degree and intensity with which it altered the entire social, reproductive, and economic life of black people that made it more brutal and painful than the transatlantic one, said Liberty. That's a pretty name, though. Liberty, liberty, liberty. All right, so on to the next one. All right, so now this one is called Top 5 Countries Where Slavery is Still Rampant. So let's see. It may be more than 2 centuries since the Transatlantic Slave Trade ended, but slavery is still very much alive in many African countries as well as much of the ancient world. As well as much of the ancient. Yeah, I said that right. Um, other varieties for other varied forms of slavery still exist across the continent, including domestic service, debt bondage, military slavery, slaves of sacrifice, local slave trade, and more. So let's go to the first one. In Mauritania, slavery has been practiced for thousands of years, particularly by the light-skinned Berbers, commonly referred to as Baden whites, and the mixed Berbers, Arabs, all of whom are descendants of slave owners locally referred to as Al Baden. Al Baden, you wish you was an American slave. I'm just the descendant of an American slave. Oh, because we rich. And y'all, well, it's not funny because slavery should be, I mean, we doing pretty well for, coming out of slavery. Anyways, so the next one is slavery in Sudan dates back to the medieval times. It has recently had a resurgence during the Second Sudanese Civil War that lasted between 1983 and 2005. That is a long ass civil war. During the war, human rights campaigners reported a rise in contemporary forms of slavery and accused the Sudanese government of supporting and arming various slave-taking militias in the country. But America's horrible. Like, our government does do horrible things, especially under, Democrat. I mean, but it really doesn't really matter. Like, Republican, Democrat, the way our government operates and the liberties and stuff that it's taking, and especially over the world, like, it's not good. Like, there's some things that our government does. Like, there's parts of it because our government doesn't all operate on the same. But a lot of like the stuff, the way the political dealings we do with countries, often is not fair to them. Like let's just say like this: some countries are justifiably our enemies, and it is righteous for them to stand against us. So that being said, because of some of the actions that we've done in their countries, so. Yeah, and I'm not talking about it. Not even talking about like the Bush or anything. I'm talking about things that we do under the table and deals we force countries to take. You know what I'm saying? Oh, yeah. I'll post a video in the link. It's talk about economic hitmen, American economic hitmen. But even though slave trade was abolished in Libya in 1853, it still continues unabated, particularly since the fall of President Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. What, you mean he stopped slavery from happening? I don't know. I gotta look into that. But, I mean, there's things. So we don't always kill people because they're evil. Or, I mean, they may do bad stuff, but normally that's not why we take people out. Like, Saddam didn't get taken out of the goodness of America's heart. There was other things that they had an interest. And what they do is they portray it as, oh, we were going to get, the people who knocked down towers, right? But that's not really what was going on, especially not in Iraq. I mean, Afghanistan and Pakistan, that's where we should have been. And then it shouldn't have lasted as long. We don't need the nation built. We need to just go find the people, kill them, and then be like, don't fucking do that again. You fuck with us, we come and we'll fuck you up. And then we leave. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just basically how it should have been. But even though the slave trade abolished in Libya I read that already. So let's go next one. According to the U.S. State Department, Egypt is a source transit and destination country for women and children trafficked for purpose of forced labor and sexual exploitation. Does not surprise me. The department further reveals that about 1 million street children in North African countries, both boys and girls, are exploited with prostitution and forced begging. In 2014, the world was shocked by tales of widespread slavery and torture in Sinai Peninsula, where tens of thousands of slaves from neighboring African countries were reportedly held for trafficking. These slaves are alleged to have been chained up and kept in water tankers for up to 6 months. Among them were women held as sex slaves. The Sinai Peninsula is now said to be a haven for Al-Qaeda operatives and Bedouin smugglers and extortionists who have a free hand in the modern-day slave trade. It is estimated that there are more than 50 human trafficking gangs currently operating in the Sinai region. Now, why are these Muslim a lot of people call them extremists, but they're not extremists. They're actually taking the actual application. They're following in the footsteps of Muhammad. And don't let any Muslim tell you, look for yourself. Go look it up for yourself. And don't listen to the woke people. I'm not going to, you don't have to believe me. Go look it up for yourself. They are, basically, that was the Reformation, especially in Saudi Arabia. I forget the dude's name. You can look it up. He, what is it? It's not soon. I forget what it's called. But what he basically did is he took the Quran. He said, we're only going to do what's in the Quran. And that's why you have, the women get beat up if they can get beat up if they're out there by themselves. Or, yeah, at least that's how it used to be. And, the terrorist stuff and blowing up and jihad. Because there's only one reference in jihad where it's inner struggle. The rest of them are outer struggle, or where you're going and you're attacking enemies. So see, South Africa is one of many African countries that suffered immensely during the Transatlantic Slave Trade. Unfortunately, things haven't changed much in terms of ending slavery in this rainbow nation. Last year, the Global Slavery Index estimated that close to 250,000 modern slaves exist in South Africa today. Victims of this practice were identified to have been subject to commercial sexual exploitation. It has also been widely alleged that the majority of wine production companies in South Africa still practice slavery. Among the most common forms of slavery in South Africa includes forced labor, human trafficking, and debt bondage, child exploitation, and forced marriage. Yeah, I had more, but I think I'm going to stop there before the video gets too long. I'm already at 20 minutes. But Islam is not the religion of the black men. In fact, they were the predecessors of the transatlantic slave trade. And you'll find that it was Islam that first degraded and started to change the attitude towards being black to the point where even blacks were ashamed of being black. And it was seen, and being a lighter skin, being white skinned, was seen as being better. So don't let them lie to you. Right? And you can talk about, there is slavery in the Bible, and you go to the Torah and the Old Testament and stuff like that. There is slavery, even in the New Testament. But a lot of that's from the Romans and stuff like that. But there is slavery in the Bible and the Torah, and it allows for slavery. That is true. But it's not it's not about certain color or, race. If you were conquered, your people could become a slave, right? But it wasn't specifically about you're African, so you're black. So you know what I'm saying? Because a lot of the Hebrews were black. Not all of them. This is a mixed multitude, but a lot of them were. So, yeah. Shalom until the next video.